This project is about creating a seller agent. I enable the Help Slide Out panel. This agent sells products. When faced with an order for a product, the agent can decide to sell at the regular price, or to sell at a promotional price, or to not sell at all. The three yellow buttons on the top left are the possible actions in this editor. By clicking the Add an Option button, I add the three options one after the other. I click the Save button to save the edited option. You can notice on the top of the screen beneath the seller agent the name of this project, the 4 steps for developing a decision policy. We are now at the first step, Initial Scenarios and Options. You can notice these options forming columns on the right-hand side of the screen. The yellow background indicates that the options have not yet been enabled by Initial Scenarios. The latter are scenarios under which options become possible. By clicking the Add Scenario button, I add a scenario. The first initial scenario is when the required quantity of the product is less or equal to the stock. I write this element and click Save. In this case, both the options to sell at the regular or promotional price are possible. Thus I click in both columns and the options are valid in this scenario's row. My second initial scenario is that the required quantity of the product is greater than the stock. In this case, I cannot sell this product. My two initial scenarios are not compatible, so I go directly to the third step to resolve conflicts between options enabled by the same scenario. So when the required quantity of the product is less or equal to the stock, my primary choice is to sell at regular price. I click Primary Choice and then I select to sell at a regular price. Raison shows this and asks me if I want to add scenario elements to prefer to sell at the promotional price. I click Yes and I enter the context, which is when the customer made purchases worth more than €200 the last month. I do not want to add more scenario elements, therefore I click Save. Subsequently, Raison shows me this composite scenario where my preferred option is to sell at promotional price and again asks me whether I can add more scenario elements to reverse this preference and sell at regular price. I click Yes and add the scenario element that it is high season. I do not want to add more context or elements, so I get back to the previous scenario. At the bottom of the screen I see the previously added context. I click No again and then one more time I finish conflict resolution. I see now that my conflict is solved. Going to the last step, Decision Policy, I can review my policy. I want to customize the automated representation of elements. I can do that in the advanced development mode provided that I can write prologue predicates and expressions. I click on Natural Language and I can now see the prologue representation of my elements. By clicking on the element, I delete the automatic representation. In this case, the value of the customer's purchases is a variable and I want this variable to be greater than or equal to 200. As I write more than one predicates or expressions, Raison creates subelements. Now I can provide individual explanations for these subelements as later the generated application will ask for these values. I check the input data box, meaning that this data must be provided by the user. I uncheck the subelements that work with existing information such as this formula. Raison adds these subelements to the elements list so that I can reuse them in other elements. I will now do the same with the element stating that the required quantity is less or equal to the stock. I define two variables now, stock and quantity. The current stock is 50 items. The quantity value must be less or equal to the current value of stock. Again, Raison creates one subelement for each prologue expression, or predicate, and I write the representation, or explanation, in natural language for each one of them. For example, the representation for the unary predicate required quantity is the question, what is the required quantity? I mark only this question for the quantity as input data. In another approach, I might want to add as input data the quantity of the stock as well and use a predicate instead of an assignment. Or, if I use the Raison API to build my own app, I might want to get the stock value from a database. This is not the case now, therefore I will use this fixed value of 50. Finally, I add a representation for the inequality stating that quantity is less than or equal to the stock. This, again, is not input data as it depends on previously provided information. I click Save and I proceed with the element stating that the required quantity is greater than the stock. I paste the same prolog representation I used previously and I update the last expression with the right operator. Following the editing of the prolog representation of the element, Raison automatically links the previously defined subelements. After I update the last expression, note that Raison automatically marks the relevant subelement with red color to indicate that the subelement has changed and I have to edit its natural language representation. I click Save. Now I return to natural language and want to run my application. I open the menu and click Run. To test, I choose my input data by clicking the Data Expanded List. I select the question, what is the required quantity, and enter 20. The suggested decision is to sell the product at regular price. Now, if I change the quantity to 60 and rerun the app, one get the decision that I cannot sell this product, as the requested quantity is larger than the one available. I try again with quantity equal to 20 and now I add the context of the customer purchases last month. I set the value to 300 and now the suggested decision is to sell at promotional price, as expected by my decision policy. I can also test what happens if it is high season or if the last month purchases are less than 200 euros. I always get the expected answer. Now I am ready to share this application with my salespersons.